Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In the United States Supreme Court, a momentous chapter in American legal history is about to be written. The marble steps and imposing columns of the court have witnessed countless pivotal cases, but few have carried stakes quite like this. The eyes of the nation, and indeed the world, are fixed on Washington, D.C. as the justices prepare to hear arguments that could alter the very structure of American government. Outside, crowds gather and news cameras roll, capturing the anticipation and tension that fill the air. Legal scholars, politicians, business leaders, and everyday citizens alike are waiting to see how the court will rule on a case that could reverberate for generations. At the heart of the case is former President Donald Trump's sweeping use of tariffs, an aggressive trade policy that upended decades of precedent. The challenge before the court is not just about economics, but about the very foundation of presidential power in the realm of international trade. Can a single individual, wielding the authority of the executive branch, reshape global commerce with the stroke of a pen? The stakes are enormous. At issue is the delicate balance between executive authority and the constitutional powers granted to Congress. The framers of the Constitution envisioned a system of checks and balances, but this case will test just how resilient that system truly is in the face of modern challenges. The court's decision could send shockwaves through the American economy, influencing everything from Wall Street to Main Street. It could redraw political lines, shift the balance of power in Washington, and reset the rules of global commerce for decades to come. Businesses, workers, and consumers all have a stake in the outcome. Recognizing the urgency, the Supreme Court has fast-tracked the case, moving it to the front of the docket. Arguments are set for early November, signaling just how critical the justices believe this issue to be. The nation waits, knowing that the ruling could come swiftly, and with far-reaching consequences. At its core, the case asks a fundamental question. Can a president unilaterally impose massive tariffs under the guise of national security, or must there be meaningful oversight from Congress? The answer will shape not only the future of U.S. trade policy, but also the boundaries of executive power for generations. The outcome will define the separation of powers, clarifying the roles of each branch of government in an era of rapid global change. It will set a precedent for how the United States navigates the complex intersection of law, politics, and international economics. This is more than a legal dispute. It's a test of American governance in a globalized world, a moment that will echo through history as the nation confronts the limits of power and the meaning of constitutional order. To understand this legal showdown, we must revisit Trump's aggressive use of tariffs. Trump's tariff man persona marked a sharp break from decades of free trade, using tariffs as a primary tool against perceived unfair practices, especially by China. His administration revived old laws like Section 232 and Section 301 to justify sweeping tariffs, sparking trade wars and global retaliation. In 2025, Trump escalated further, invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, EEPA, to impose even broader tariffs, citing threats from trade imbalances to fentanyl trafficking. Critics argue this stretched IEPA far beyond its intent, effectively granting the president a new taxing power and bypassing Congress. This expansive interpretation set the stage for today's constitutional clash. The legal battle began with small businesses and states hit hardest by tariffs, challenging the president's authority under IEPA. In a landmark appellate decision, the courts ruled that Trump exceeded his powers, stating IEPA isn't a blank check for indefinite global tariffs. The administration appealed, warning that limiting executive power would cripple the president's ability to respond to emergencies. The Supreme Court's decision to hear the case on an expedited basis signals its national importance. Now, both sides prepare for a showdown that will define the boundaries of presidential authority. The justices must interpret IEPA's text and history against the Constitution's separation of powers. Their verdict will set a precedent for generations. At the heart of this pivotal legal battle lies the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a law originally crafted to give the president targeted tools for responding to extraordinary threats from abroad. Rather than serving as a blank check for sweeping economic action, IEPA was designed to allow the executive branch to impose precise sanctions, freeze assets, or restrict specific transactions when national security or foreign policy was at risk. Historically, Presidents have invoked IEPA in moments of crisis, freezing the assets of hostile governments, blocking trade with nations supporting terrorism, or targeting individuals involved in illicit activities. The law's power has always been significant, but it was understood to be limited in scope, focused on clear and present dangers rather than broad economic policy. President Trump's decision to use IEEPA as justification for imposing global tariffs marked a dramatic departure from past practice. By declaring trade imbalances and drug trafficking at the southern border as national emergencies, the administration expanded the definition of what constitutes a threat, raising fundamental questions about the boundaries of presidential authority. Plaintiffs in the case argue that this move undermines the constitutional separation of powers. They contend that Congress alone holds the authority to regulate commerce and levy taxes, and that allowing the president to bypass legislative oversight threatens the very foundation of American democracy. Critics warn that unchecked executive power could erode the delicate balance established by the Constitution, setting a precedent that future presidents might exploit to sidestep Congress on a wide range of issues, not just trade, but potentially any matter labeled an emergency. The administration, however, maintains that IEPA's broad and flexible language was intentional, crafted by Congress to ensure the president could act swiftly and decisively in times of crisis. They argue that in a rapidly changing world, the executive must have the tools to protect national interests without being hamstrung by legislative gridlock. Now, the Supreme Court faces a momentous decision. Does IEEPA truly authorize such sweeping presidential action? Or has the executive branch overstepped its constitutional bounds? The outcome will not only resolve this case, but also set a lasting precedent for the limits of presidential power in the United States. The answer will shape the future of American governance, redefining the balance between Congress and the president for generations to come. The economic stakes are staggering. If the tariffs are struck down, the Treasury could owe up to $1 trillion in refunds, risking fiscal chaos. Tariffs have already raised costs for businesses and consumers, fueling inflation and uncertainty. A sudden reversal could disrupt industries that benefited from protection, while others would welcome relief. Markets are volatile, bracing for a seismic shift in trade policy. The court's decision will determine whether the U.S. continues down a protectionist path or returns to a rules-based system. Economists warn that the outcome will shape investment, jobs, and America's global economic role. The stakes go far beyond the courtroom. This case is a test of constitutional boundaries. Where does Congress's power end and the president's begin? For decades, Congress delegated trade authority to the executive for flexibility, but critics say this has gone too far. A ruling against the administration would reassert Congress's role and force lawmakers to clarify presidential emergency powers. A win for the president would cement a major shift toward executive dominance in economic policy. The outcome will redefine the separation of powers for the 21st century, the stakes, the very structure of American government. The world is watching. America's trading partners have endured years of tariff-driven uncertainty, straining alliances and fueling a global trade war. If the Supreme Court upholds the tariffs, protectionism could spread, and trade negotiations may stall. Striking down the tariffs would signal a return to cooperation and rules-based order, easing tensions worldwide. The decision will impact relations with China, the EU, and beyond, shaping the future of global commerce. The court's reasoning could influence other trade disputes and international strategies. This is not just a U.S. issue, it's a turning point for the global economy. The world awaits America's next move. Legal scholars, economists, and trade experts agree. This case is a landmark. Many argue that Congress, not the president, should control tariffs, and that IEEPA was never meant for sweeping trade policy. A ruling against the administration would restore constitutional checks and reduce economic uncertainty. Trade experts say it could lower costs and foster stability, while critics of free trade warn it might weaken U.S. industries. Some believe strong executive action is needed to counter unfair foreign practices. The debate reveals deep divisions over law, economics, and America's global role. Whatever the outcome, the decision will be intensely scrutinized. The Supreme Court's word will echo for decades. America stands at a crossroads, facing choices that will define its economic destiny for decades to come. The decisions made now will ripple through every corner of the nation, affecting workers, businesses, and families from coast to coast. At stake is not just the direction of trade policy, but the very principles that have guided American prosperity and leadership on the world stage. The Supreme Court's ruling on Trump's tariffs is more than a legal decision. It's a turning point that will shape the future of trade, the limits of government power, and America's role in the global economy for an entire generation. The justices must weigh not only the letter of the law, but the long-term consequences for democracy and international relations. If the administration prevails, it will cement the president's authority to act unilaterally on trade, ushering in an era where executive power can reshape markets overnight. This could mean a future marked by volatility, uncertainty, and a more protectionist stance that challenges decades of economic integration. On the other hand, if the court strikes down the tariffs, it will reaffirm Congress's constitutional authority over trade, potentially restoring a system of checks and balances. This could open the door for renewed bipartisan cooperation and a return to America's traditional leadership in forging global trade agreements. The outcome will force policymakers, businesses, and allies to fundamentally rethink their strategies. Alliances may shift, new partnerships could emerge, and the balance of power between branches of government will be tested as never before. The justices' verdict will land in a deeply polarized nation where every decision is scrutinized and debated. In an era of global uncertainty, the stakes have never been higher, and the consequences will be felt far beyond America's borders. United States versus Universal Steel Products will be remembered as a defining moment in American legal and economic history. A case that tested the boundaries of power and set the course for the nation's future. The future of American commerce and the very rules that govern global trade now hang in the balance. Every business, investor, and trading partner is watching closely, knowing that the outcome will shape the world economy for years to come. The world is watching as history is made, waiting to see which path America will choose, and how that choice will echo across continents and generations.